So I'm Glenn Kaler. I work for University of Maine Cooperative Extension Pest Management Unit, primarily responsible for tree fruit pest management. We have a meeting every year, pre-season IPM meeting, to talk about what's going on and what's new. And of course, with COVID, that isn't happening. So we're doing these webinars. And I don't know, we maybe keep doing webinars. We've got 221 people registered for this one. That's a lot more we could ever fit in the room for the physical meeting. But anyway, here we are. I'm very fortunate and looking forward to having Dr. Suzanne Blatt present for us today. She holds the position of Research Scientist of Integrated Pest Management and Entomology at the Kentville Research and Development Center in Nova Scotia with the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Her research program is committed to the improvement of pest management tools available to and benefiting Canadian tree fruit and vegetable producers. Her work includes biological control agents, improved traps for more efficient monitoring, sterile insect release, and use of host chemical cues for mass trapping. She works on invasive species such as brown marmorated stink bug and leek moth. So she's not just tree fruit, she's also doing vegetable pests, and native pests such as apple maggot. As new pest issues arise, she works closely with industry partners to ensure that the research is relevant and grounded in science. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Suzanne.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me and giving me the opportunity to share with you some of the work that's been happening in Nova Scotia. So when Glenn contacted me, he was after, a little bit of information on apple maggot. And when we were having our chat, he dared to ask the question of how long has apple maggot been around Nova Scotia? And so that's why there's a little bit of history in here, just to splice it up. To put us into perspective on where I'm coming from, quite geographically speaking, on the eastern side of Canada, we have Nova Scotia. Kentville is around at the end of that little red arrow, and the Annapolis Valley, which I will be speaking about, is the predominant area where our apples are produced, and they are in that little red region. So we have a very condensed area where we produce apples in a relatively small province. So when I started looking into a bit of the history of, when did apple make it into Nova Scotia, I stumbled upon this document, which had a lot of gems in it that I wanted to share with you. And so the first record of apple in Nova Scotia was all the way back into 1605 with our good old Samuel de Champlain. And it would have been the French Acadians who were using apples in what they had as wild apple back then. And the Nova Scotia Fruit Growers Association came into being in 1863. So between 1605 and then, we ended up having, more than one or two people dabbling into apples. And then we ended up having a bit of a market. We were selling over to Britain. And when we got up into about the 1930s, which is around the peak years, sad to say, of Nova Scotia apple production, little Nova Scotia, in that little area that I was showing you, was producing about 40% of all of the apples from Canada came out of that one little area, which is a little bit on the impressive side. But when the war hit and that line of product going to Britain got shut down, suddenly we had a lot of apples being produced and we had no market. So the Nova Scotia government, in its infinite wisdom, came up with this Buy Home Products campaign, which, when it's phrased like that, makes you think of cleaning products, as opposed to what I think they were going for was to get people into the local markets and buying, buy local. It's a much better campaign message than buy home products. So that campaign was on the go. And it did have some impact. At the top there, you can see sort of the change and the shift in where our apples were going. So in 1933, we were 79% export, and that dropped to 21% only 6 years later. And then we fast forward 40 years, and now our exports were 5%, but our fresh market has increased. But it took a while for that to happen. And according to this document, it's because Nova Scotia grew mostly medium quality, low priced cooking apples, because that's what the British liked. So we were a little bit, slow to sort of diversify what we were doing. But enter the 90s, and in comes Honeycrisp. And Honeycrisp has really revitalized our industry and turned things around. So now we've got apple production, about 13 million in farm gate. It's about 9% of the national production, only about 33 million kilograms of fruit. And the main products, the high value cultivars that we look at, Honeycrisp Ambrosia, and then Gala is another one that's in there, along with Empire Spy. There's still the standards, Cortland and Macintosh, but our growers are starting to lean towards the high value ones and to really do them well. So that brings us to our number one culprit and our pest of apple maggot. So according to CFIA, this appeared first in Canada, found in Ontario, somewhere around 1896. Now it took it a little bit of time to make its way to Nova Scotia, because they didn't seem to find it until about 1913. And so that's at the time where now we've got the Nova Scotia Department of Ag, the NSDA, and now they're starting to create a maggot control board. And so they're getting into the arsenicals and the products, but they're also looking at other ways to control this little critter. So we're going to just walk quickly through the life cycle, which most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. It starts off as pupae. So the pupae are this life stage that overwinters. Somewhere in around July into August, you have the adults emerging. On the top slide there has both a male and a female lounging on the apples in the field. They will spend, anywhere between 7 to 7 days, 14 days, finishing their sexual maturation, mating, and then they will lay their eggs on the apple. Good little maggot burrows in, causes those trails, which we all know are unmarketable. And then we have the maggot dropping out and pupating, and then that's the overwintering stage. And that continues all the way through September and into October. Now, most of the provinces in Canada have had apple maggot, up to, since somewhere between that 1913 and 1869. I would argue that most of the other provinces also had apple maggot, with the exception of Newfoundland. Newfoundland only had its first record of apple maggot in 2016. And so in the process of them looking at the apples that they had, they sent a lot of those puparia up to our national collection in Ottawa. And I want to draw your attention to the different cold treatments that they did. So they were looking at how many came in and out, but they had one set that they did not put in cold, and they ended up with a significant percentage of the number coming out as adults. And it's well documented in the literature that there is a percentage of that population that does not need that diapause. It does not need that cold snap in order for the adult to come back out. So this is what kind of prompted the question with our growers, because we were seeing apple maggot well beyond when we would typically see it, even 15 years ago. We would tend to see it early being July and August, and then there'd be a hard frost in early September, and that would kind of be the end of it. But now we're seeing them flying even into September and late September. So what I'm showing here, this is 2 blocks at the Kentville Research Station where I work, from 2013 all the way through to 2020. And in the first 3 years, we were largely just monitoring these blocks to know when to spray and keep the populations down. By 2016, we were starting to look towards doing some actual apple maggot work, so we needed to let the populations build up. So from 2016 through to 2020, they're now unsprayed blocks. And what you can note is that the numbers, they rose up beautifully. If you're an insect person, this is beautiful. So in 2017, so that blue dotted line, we had this spike right around early August. And then we also had another little spike here in late August and early September. 2018 saw something similar, so that's the orange line. So it started coming out in mid-July, and then we ended up with what we thought would have been the typical decline moving into the fall, but then we had another little boomf in late August and going into September, and we saw the same thing in 2019, which is that darker blue dotted line. In 2020, which was a really, really warm summer, all of the activity happened early. So this peak, which typically is down here in late July, early August, is showing up back here in late July. And that's because of the heat that we had. there are many degree day models for apple maggot. And when we try to put those together with some of the, what we were seeing in these blocks, it doesn't fit. And that's the long and the short of it. So what I'm presenting below is from the CEPR model. So this is a model that's been developed in Quebec. They use a base of 6.4, and they start their counts on March 1. And what they're finding in Quebec is it's a nice 609 degree day window from 963 to 1572. Well, Nova Scotia apple maggot didn't read this book. And so it's showing up much earlier than that. Even our latest is still ahead of the 963. So in 2016, which is relatively late for us to be seeing apple maggot in early August, it's still ahead of when the degree days that they're seeing them in Quebec. In terms of this, that window, our later 3 years of 2018, 2019, and 2020 are all longer. So our season is extended in terms of when our apple maggot are out in those orchards. So the big question on a lot of growers' minds, are those later flies, are they coming from the orchard? Are they delayed? Is it that same overwintering population and they're just really slow and it's warm enough that now they're coming out later? That's one option. The other option is they're flying in from the surrounding vegetation. Because let's say that there's a nearby block or there's a nearby host. And so they're looking at maybe they flew in from there. That's another viable option. And the third option is that these early adults are laying their eggs. Those eggs are managing to go all the way through, and they are eclosing as adults in early September. The tricky part is to figure out what we're looking at with respect to sorting out where these maggots are coming from. We're going to be trying a few things this summer, or this coming summer, to see if we can tease that apart. But we do need to know really what these apple maggots are doing at the end of the season, because we do see stings showing up later, which suggests that there is still some potential for damage long after the typical sprays have gone on. Whoops, come back. Yeah, so here's where we're looking at the damage. So up in the left-hand corner, we've got Honeycrisp that we pulled out this past year on August 5, happily riddled. All of these little red dots have a little characteristic sting dimple next to them. So those are what we're pulling out of the orchard. These apples were brought in and left at 20 degrees and then cracked open on the 24th. And you see how much feeding has been happening. Down at the bottom, we've got the maggot, which obviously makes it an unmarketable critter. We will survey for and monitor for our apple maggot using a yellow sticky trap. And the threshold for that is one fly on a trap if it's baited, and then 5 if it's an unbaited trap. And that comes from our organic production guide. In Nova Scotia, we have a 0 tolerance for either stings or galleries in order for those apples to go for export. And so apple maggot has a huge impact on our market options, and it affects the management practices. Our growers are very cautious about trying products that have not been proven, trying anything different, especially on their high value cultivars. There's a lot of dollars on the line with respect to this pest. One of the ways that Nova Scotia has been dealing with apple maggot is to go after the control zones, which are around the blocks. And so what I've got here is this is just a bit of a history of where those control zones, when they came into play, who's kind of had a hand in encouraging them to exist, why they exist. CFIA was in there in 91. They came out with a quarantine directive indicating that for Canada in general, apple maggot is a quarantine pest. The province throughout all of these years has maintained the host tree control and has been instrumental in doing block inspections, whether they've been required by CFIA or whether they have been required by the packing houses, so that the packers know what the quality of apple is when it's coming to them. In 2019, NSDA, they went and updated their control zone and their sampling protocols to make them more relevant to the new configuration of the orchards that we now have, being the higher density. So this is just an example. Earlier in the call, they were talking about some really large tracts of apple of orchards that are present in New York. So I want to present our lovely little Nova Scotian patchwork quilt of our apple blocks. Those are in green. And then the red area around them is what used to be the 300-meter control zone, which is now extended to be the blue 500-meter. And that increases the area that is to be covered by this to about an increase of 6,000 hectares, which is a significant amount of land when you think that not all of those pockets of land are owned by the grower. And there's a significant amount of time that needs to be invested to go and identify all those rogue trees. And then the cost for both for the product to actually control them and try to reduce the number of apple maggots that are hanging around on the fringes and just feeding into the orchards. So in 2017, the NSDA, we decided to do a rogue apple tree project. And the reason behind this is that the current method, which is EasyJect, which is shown here, which is a glyphosate product, this was being used, it was being applied in August. And year after year, the person was going back to, they'd be going back to the same trees and noticing that it took several applications before those trees would actually die. And so they were wondering, they were frustrated by this, and the program affectionately became known as the Rogue Apple Visitation Program, because the person seemed to go out and visit these trees over and over. There were a few new products that had come out, and the other issue that had happened is because of the varied approaches to that control zone, you now have different ages and size classes of these trees. So the three products that were part of this study: EasyJect, which I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with; Garlon, which is a spray that's applied to the lower 12 inches on one side of the tree, so you have to kind of scratch off some of the bark; and then Estaprop, which is applied all the way around on the lower 3 feet of the stem. And the project looked at applying these during July, and then there was an assessment done in November. These are just some details about the products that we were using. And here's the size classes of the trees that are out there in that control zone. So we've got these varied range of things. And with the EasyJect, as you increase the size, you have to increase the number of caps. With the Estaprop, we went in a range or a rate of 2.2 liters. And with Garlon, we had 20 liters diluted in 100 liters of diesel. There were 21 sites that were involved in this work, and there were 129 trees in the final study. The target was 10 trees per category, and we didn't quite always make that. Some of the trees ended up having some other issues. Some of the trees ended up getting lost because they were unable to find them again once they were flagged. This graph is showing the results of the assessment that was done in November. So what we are looking at here is by size class across the bottom, how do the different products compare to each other? And you're seeing some significant differences between them, especially where, EasyJect, which is in the yellow, in that short period of time is across the board is showing less than 50% efficacy. Estaprop and Garlon are showing some real promise, and especially when the trees are young, and that carries over to some of the trees in the clump. I would argue that some of those are smaller. And then you've got the medium and the larger, the 6 to the 15 seems to be separating out which products are going to give you any kind of efficacy. A follow-up assessment was done in the early summer of 2018. And so here what I've paired is the blue bar is showing the percent that were dead back in November, and the red is now showing the percent that are dead now. So given a little bit more time, more death has occurred, which is a good thing. But of note is Garlon, which was not looking so good at that 6 to 10 centimeter size class, really did performed well. And then also not so bad was the EasyJect. But again, you're barely getting over 60% mortality with that product on the on any of the size classes. So as always, growers always say to me, well, how does it pencil out? And so when you start to put the actual dollars and cents to these products and their carrier costs, and based upon what we used in this trial, the product that came out with the best bang for the buck in terms of the age class, the size of tree that it could tackle, and the cost per tree turned out to be Estaprop at 26 cents a tree. So the EasyJect, 97 cents a tree, but if you're visiting it 2 and 3 times, it's, you know, that will add up, versus the Garland, which is about $1.43. So, I mean, to me, the happy compromise is you go in with your Estaprop and all your smaller guys, and you reserve your Garland for the bigger issues that you have in that control zone. And so those control zones, they're under provincial management, and there is legislation which would allow for the removal of those, even if the homeowner did not want to do that. But due to resources and just being generally very nice, a lot of those directives and things don't have as much follow through or teeth as perhaps they should. All right, can I stop there and then hand that over to Elizabeth?
Absolutely. So we are going to launch our first poll. Please remember, these polls are...
Okay, do I need to stop sharing?
Nope.
Nope.
You
Okay.
should see it here. So everybody should see that poll on their screen now. And remember, these polls are for your pesticide recertification credits. So if you could please make sure you answer those questions. There we go. Great. And we'll let that set up there for a minute or so. And in the meantime, do folks have any questions for Suzanne?
Well, I've got a question. This is Glenn.
Go, Glenn.
How much were you applying of the Estaprop and the Garland per tree?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I want to go back in my slides because I can probably just roughly calculate it. It was not as much as you would think. It actually, both of them coated very, very well. And so the amount per tree was in the, less than 100 milliliters.
So you were spraying that on or brushing it on?
It was being, the Estaprop was being sprayed on, and then the Garland was as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were being used in a little, like a backpack sprayer type thing.
What was the total labor time to do this is the question.
Oh, that is definitely the bigger question. And it took, to do those trees in that study, they were applied over 2 days. And that includes a reasonable amount of travel time. So the sites stretched across, oh jeepers, they were across an area of 30 to 40 kilometers. And then you'd be stopping, traipsing in, finding your trees, applying your product, and then coming back out, driving to the next site. So
basically per hectare,
ooh,
just the time to walk around and find the trees and dose them?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and because we were targeting specific size classes, that added a lot of additional time. I mean, if there was a part of the control zone that was on your property, I mean, you would just be focused in that one area. So your travel time would be a lot less.
And I thought you said you did it in August. We got a comment here that August is better than July. Did you do it in July or August?
Sorry. If I put July on the slide, then I misspoke if I said August.
So it was July that when you did it?
Yes.
Okay, because the comment, and I agree with the comment, is July is a much better time, closer to the fall, retraction of nutrients back down in the root system.
Yes, and that is one of the issues with the product, is this disconnect between, there's the funding program that the province has available, and then there's the best time to actually apply it. And so they would have the person hired in July and then moving into August, but not into September. And so it is one of the confounding reasons why the EasyJect probably was not working to best effect.
Okay, so you did it mid-July-ish then.
Because that's, yeah, and because that's consistent with when the program was funding people and when it had been done in previous years.
Right.
So the question was to understand if that's when you have money to do the work, what other products would work.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the comparable results if you did it in late August or even September, if you could.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've talked about, how to control, or what the province has been looking at with respect to the host, the outside of the orchard control. And so now we're going to move into the orchard. And this slide is a nice historical overview of the types of products that have been used over the decades in Nova Scotia, and how it has, and the correlation between the number, the percentage of blocks that have been inspected and then have actual apple maggot. So on the far left, we started in the 1940s, where you were back using the arsenic type products, and you're watching the population go up. And then in the 60s and 70s, we started in with dimethoate, which has been deregistered in Canada. And you saw some more dips in that percentage. And once we got into the organophosphates in the 80s and 90s, and now you're watching those percentages come way down. By the 2000s, we'd moved into the neonics came on board. And in the 2010s, Exarel is the most recent product that the growers have at their disposal to control apple maggot and other pests, but apple maggot being one of them. And that percentage of blocks which are infected with apple maggot has pretty much leveled out. And so it's kind of sits around the 20 to 30% in any given year since 2010. So here's a little bit more detail on those products. You're probably very, very familiar with them. The one change that we're seeing with the products is, so when they go up for review, sometimes they come back and there's little tweakings that can happen in terms of, the reentry periods, or how long it is until you can go in and get in there to harvest. So the two changes that have happened just this year are with Assail and with Imidan. And so that reentry period has doubled in both cases. And they've added the proviso that if you're then going to go in and follow up with hand thinning, then it needs to have some days before you can get back in there to do that type of work. So this is going to change the water on the beans moving forward for a lot of our growers. And so the trials that I've been working on, we're using the products as per the label before these little changes came into effect. So yeah, the challenges, on top of the reentries and the pre-harvest intervals, we've also got some of these products that are expiring and that their labels will need to be renewed. We know with Imidan, it's one of the last organophosphates that we have, and it is on a phase out program. So I don't know if it's going to be renewed when that label expires in 2024. The neonics have also been under a lot of scrutiny because of their impact on pollinators. And both of those labels, again, are coming up soon. The deal with Exarel seems to be it's how effective it is or not, even though it is a newer product. And again, not a lot of uptake when it's on those higher value cultivars. So what the growers have been doing is they've been pulling in some other products that will give a little bit of suppression so that they can still work in their orchard blocks and move around with respect, even with these REIs that they have. One of those products that's allowing them to do this is Delegate, and that's a spinosad product. So this work that I'm going to show you started back in 2017, And it was brought to my attention by the current tree fruit specialist with Perennia. And he wanted to know, like, how good are these current products and how many sprays do we actually need? Like the label says you can go 3 or 4 and Imadan up to 5. But can we ratchet that back? And then as the project started rolling along and we started seeing flies showing up later in the season, then it became, is there something we can pair it with that we can also provide some protection going into that the harvest window? So we used those 4 products. This was the very first crack at this. And so we ended up with it was a big look-see. So we had 17 treatments in total, 4 replicates, single trees with a backpack sprayer. And when we started this work, we did not have a nice block of trees of all one variety to work with. And so we ended up in a mixed block, which we all know that apple maggot does have a cultivar preference. We were very hopeful that it would not be a big deal. And so we tried as best we could to spread those treatments out across all of the cultivars. We ended up having our first capture on July 10. And so that triggered the first spray on the 17th. And then basically every 2 weeks we went in and there was a spray put on in that block. We didn't worry a lot about the post-harvest interval for this particular experiment because we knew we wouldn't be picking those apples until October. So the take home from this one, and this is the proviso, is that for this very crude first time study, a sale did perform the best and it gave us the lowest percentage of apples with maggot, with stings, and the lowest number of galleries per apple. But we have to keep in mind, they are single tree applications and it was a mixed cultivar block. So when I started to shake up and look at the data with respect to cultivar, this is where apple maggot becomes a bit of a trickster or an irritant, depending on your perspective. And with this much of a cultivar swing going through all of those treatments, yeah, it looked like a sale performed the best, but it could also have been happenstance by the mix of cultivars that those treatments ended up being applied on. And this range of preference that we saw was by and far a lot greater than we were expecting to see. So we had to do a little bit better. Fortunately, in 2018, there was another tree fruit scientist who was announcing their retirement. And so some of the blocks that they were working in were becoming available, and I was able to jump on those. So now I'm into 2 blocks, which are all Honeycrisp. We now have a little more space to play in, and we were looking at 3 trees per replicate. The other thing that we did is we narrowed down. So based on the results that we had with the 1, 2, 3, and 4 sprays, we dropped the 1 and we dropped the 4 and we focused in on 2 and 3, because the idea would be that, can we get the same level of efficacy if we use fewer sprays? And if we're going to pair it with something, then we still need to be well ahead of the harvest interval. So we want to be able to have another product come in that is going to allow the growers to go into the orchard. So in 2018, these were the results that we got. And we look at them and we kind of go, well, they make no hill of sense. It looks like 2 sprays is even better than 3 sprays, which does not make a lot of sense. The untreated block did better than some of the products. When you looked at the percentage of tunnels that those treatments ended up with, yep, none of this ended up being significant. But undaunted, we went ahead and we did it again in 2019, and we tackled it the same way. And we again found a little bit of this mishmash of, we are not certain what is going on with respect to these products with this particular apple maggot population. And maybe our population is just so high. We do have a high population in Kentville, and you'll see some numbers to back that up a little later. Maybe that's the issue. In 2019, we also went into Prince Edward Island, and we did the same trial over there, and we had weird results. And that's still using like 3 or 4 trees as part of your plot. When we went and approached a grower in New Brunswick, he said, well, I'm not going to fuss around with that 3 or 4 tree per replicate thing. So I want to do the whole row. So he sprayed the products on whole rows of Honeycrisp. And we still ended up looking at kind of bizarre results. The control in his case, so we have to explain the control that happened in New Brunswick. So the control was a situation where he didn't like that we had an unsprayed control. And I understand that. So he said, can I make that a different variety? And knowing how Apple Maggot likes different varieties, part of me was going, no, we can't. But yet I understood where the grower was coming from. So this becomes a joke. How do you protect Macintosh from Apple Maggot? You hide it in a Honeycrisp block, because the control was a couple rows of Macintosh that he had left over before he replanted around it with Honeycrisp. And so that's why that control is so very, very low, because it loves Honeycrisp over Macintosh, hands down. The other thing that we were trying in 2019 was we were playing around with this product, which was a capsicum, oleoresin, garlic oil, canola oil. We called it the salad dressing. And it's supposed to basically be a deterrent. Neem oil is another one, supposed to just sort of make the flavor and things of the tree less appealing for the Apple Maggot to be there. So we were playing around with, we took 2 of the conventional products. We took a Sail and we took Exarel, paired it up with the product, these 2 products in a couple different ways, depending on the amount of space we had to work with. And the only thing that kind of pops out is when you go with a Sail and this Gwyn, you do end up with less Apple Maggot. And we thought that was kind of interesting. And that was worth a further look in 2020. With respect to the Neem, the issue, as much as we looked at this little, this dip over here with Neem, and we were going, that's an interesting reduction. That's very nice. When you go to apply that product, if your temperature is below 15 degrees Celsius, it's a block. And so they had to warm it up in the truck in order to get it liquefied so that they could actually apply it. So we dropped Neem from any further trials just due to sheer irritation factor in trying to have it work when you would want to be out and applying your products. So in 2020, we went out and we paired, so A is for a Sail, G is for Gwyn. So we basically did a little bit of a repeat because we wanted to see if we could get, can we repeat that? Was that a fluke? And for a control, we did the Gwyn all on its own. So these were full rows of Honeycrisp. We did 2 rows for each treatment. And then we sampled from the inner side of both of those rows. So we all basically had, a 1/2 of the row, the bit of the row as a control. Or not a control, as a buffer between the 2 treatments. So there's a section of the orchard we did not sample from between those treatments, just in case there was some overlap or drift. So the first thing we ended up with was, a definite significant impact of adding the Gwyn and the Sail. And when we added the Gwyn, so that same, here's the Sail, and then we use the Gwyn, showing us our lowest percentage of apples with stings. As much as I know the company was not thrilled about seeing Gwyn on its own with this much Apple Maggot damage, we were absolutely thrilled that we actually had a control that did what a control should have done, and had a lot of damage. The percentage of apples with tunnels, again, that a Sail, the two applications of a Sail followed up by Gwyn, which allows you to get into the block to do other things, showed up the best. The other block that we had in Kentville, we went and we're using, we paired up not just a Sail with Gwyn, we wanted to do it again, but we also put Calypso and we used Exarel just to see what the impact would be there. The Exarel performed really, really quite well with the Gwyn. So 2 shots of Exarel and then hit it with Gwyn, and that seemed to really reduce the percentage of apples with stings. A Sail in this particular block, not so much of an impact this time in that particular block, not sure why. But then our control in this case was, we did have a no spray control, and the no spray control did show more Apple Maggot damage. hallelujah, which is what you would expect to see. We took the Assail and Gwyn over to New Brunswick, and our results from that work, the only place we saw any type of apple maggot damage, so this is percent apples with stings, was in the Assail. If we paired Assail with Gwyn, we had beautiful apples. We doubled the number of apples that we sampled and that we looked at in 2020 compared with 2019. We thought perhaps our sample size was too small, so we doubled it. We're now looking at like 800 apples per treatment, and then multiply that by 3 treatments, 2,400 apples that we're looking at out of this orchard. So then we thought, well, maybe it has to do with the populations. Maybe the apple population, the apple maggot populations are different. So in New Brunswick, our first capture was in 24th of July. They captured a total of 12, and their traps went up in mid-July and were up for the whole season. So they got gunky, they stopped collecting, so they didn't swap them out, and they just pulled them down at the end, and at the end of when they were harvesting, and we just counted what was on them. And so this is what those traps caught before they got polluted. So how many other apple maggots were out there, we really don't know. We did take this over into PEI, and we were able to do a similar 2 rows per treatment. And the first apple maggot over there was on the 13th. They only sampled, they had their traps up until they got, it's time to go and start that count of when we spray. And then they pulled the traps out. So the only captured data they have was 8. But none of their treatments had any apple maggot damage. We looked at 2,400 beautiful apples from Prince Edward Island. So the jury seems to be a little out on how these products are working, and it seems to be a density of the apple maggot density itself is playing a role here. And to give you a comparison with Nova Scotia, and in 2020, and so we put our traps up in early July. We take them down as soon as they become polluted, and we monitor all the way through to middle or end of September. And so what we are finding is a lot of flies in Nova Scotia. We know we have a high population at the research center. If we were to do the same type of trapping in a commercial site, they would probably have numbers that are more similar to what you're seeing in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. Our growers do a really good job of keeping their apple maggot populations as low as possible. We do have hot spots. We do have perimeters where the fly does wander in. But on the whole, our growers do really, really well. And that also goes for the growers in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. So we're going to stick all this together. So apple maggot has been one of those critters that has been a pest since basically there was apple in Nova Scotia. It's proving tricky because of it's fussy in some ways, it's particular in other ways. And there's this increased window of entry into the orchard because our falls are becoming beautiful. We've got lovely falls now. I remember as a kid that the first killing frost would be when we'd be going back to school around Labor Day. And now we don't see killing frost until into October. And so that's providing them with more of a window. So that percentage of that population that isn't going to go into diapause, it's not getting zapped out, it's not getting killed, it's not too cold for it to come out, it's now possibly coming out. We're possibly going to be combining biopesticides to see if that can help with those flies that are in the end of the season. I've put a shot in here down in the bottom right corner. This is a vial of parasitoids. So when we go to get apples for the colony so that we can do work during the rest of the year, we often find and collect these little braconid parasitoids. And with the numbers that we've been watching build up in our sites, we know they're not controlling the apple maggot, but for a grower who has a very low population, biocontrol might be a viable option to reduce the number of years where you have to get in there and actually put in a pesticide spray. Just as another tool in the toolbox, it might buy some time if the product is, not as available or being pulled. So there's definitely more work to be done. And the story will continue to unfold. So thank you very much for listening to the history of apple maggot and apple in Nova Scotia. Thank you to all of it's the village that studies apple maggot. And if there are any other questions, yeah, we can go for that.
Okay, Suzanne, one question just for clarification. You showed those expiry dates. Those aren't dates that those products are going away. That's just when they have to be re-registered, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So they may get re-registered. You don't know at this point.
Exactly. Like we know for sure that Imadan is being phased out. It's on its way. And we just don't know when that actual date will be, whether it gets re-registered beyond 2024. That one is in question. I'm pretty certain the other 3 will get re-registered, but whenever they do a re-registration, it's an opportunity for them to, sort of look at it and go, well, instead of having 4 applications, we think, due to risks or whatever, it should be 2. We think the re-entry periods should change. So there's other things that can come into play when once a label is up for re-registration.
But Imadan's definitely on its way out?
That's the word, that's the word on the street.
Okay. One question about your spray trials, or you're talking about, chemical control in Canada, Nova Scotia, was how about pyrethroids?
We don't have, I'm not the best person to answer that one, but those 4 products are the ones that we have registered for apple maggot. There are other pyrethroid products, but I don't think they are. I think the apple maggot's been taken off.
Well, I put an answer in the chat that, based on our earlier conversation we had in our practice session, was that pyrethroid use, especially late season, is strongly discouraged in Canada.
Yeah.
So it's not really an option for apple maggot. So in Canada, does the pest have to be on the label to apply?
Yes.
Okay. Some questions here. Would you consider using azotin 0, azotin O, instead of neem oil? It has azadirachtin as the active ingredient, and it definitely does not get blocky.
Does not get blocky? We could definitely give that one a shot. If it doesn't get blocky, that would be good to know. I know when we were looking for neem oil, the product that we got was the only one we were able to get in Canada.
Okay.
I think that's the other issue, is that some of the products that I think your growers are familiar with, we can't get hold of.
Well, likewise, it goes the other way too. You guys have some stuff that we don't have, so.
Like full.
And then you change the names, so it makes it even more complicated. But,
yeah.
You may have addressed this, but I was trying to monitor the chat and everything at the same time, so I might have missed it. But there's this huge difference you saw in your 2020 control trials versus those baffling spray results in the first couple of years. Was that because the first couple of years were at the Kentville research sites, which are loaded with apple maggot, and then your later tests were at lower pressure? Is that the point you concluded there, or?
Well, yeah, we think that the apple maggot pressure may be playing a role, but we did have trials in all 4 years at the Kentville station. So from 2017 through to 2020, that first set of slides from 2020 was site 1 and site 2. Those were at Kentville.
Okay, so I'll just.
And so even under high pressure, we were seeing some benefits of the products. It might have to do with how we were applying them to whole rows, to larger area.
Okay.
Versus before we were using smaller plots. We were trying to understand why we were seeing such, ridiculously variable results.
And you think that variability might be in part due to the small plot size, that they're hopping from one tree to another, and it's not necessarily where the pesticide is on the actual tree. It's
correct.
Whether they get killed beforehand or not.
Yes. Yeah. So now that we're kind of cooking with propane.
Yeah. Those late maggots that you're seeing with your late warm falls and those I call them second generation adults. I don't know what else you would call them. Do those maggots lay eggs in fruit?
That I would say that part we don't know. I was hopeful when I started digging into the degree day models that I might be able to find sort of an indication of, like it takes this many degree days to go from egg to maggot to pupae. And for apple maggot, that's not how those degree day models are laid out. They basically, they focus on when the adult flies are flying, and then they don't worry about the development of the rest of it, which is very different from other insect pests with degree day models, where they talk about going from, it takes so many degree days from the egg. Like for codling moth, we know that once you have your biofix, that you're going to have a certain number of degree days before you're going to see the eggs and then the larvae hatching. And you don't have that same type of refinement with the apple maggot. That kind of surprised me when I started digging into it, because I wanted to know, do we have enough degree day? Do we have enough heat units that if an adult did come out in late August, does it have enough time and heat to develop, to become sexually mature, mate, and then lay an egg that would have a chance to do anything? So there's potential for the egg laying, but whether or not that larvae would be able to actually do something, I think is less certain. And then it's also battling the day length, because as the day length goes down, that's another cue to move into overwintering, and not develop.
So yeah, that's interesting. So, I guess we figure it's about 7 days during the regular apple maggot season between the time of emergence and when she starts laying eggs, right?
Yes.
And so if you took those number of degree days that you would have during July, which is, say it's 100 degree days, whatever, do you get enough of those during fall for that all to take place? That's the question.
That's the question.
And you just don't know yet, right?
Correct.
And how important is photo period for apple maggot? I didn't realize they even responded to that.
Apparently, we've discovered this when trying to rear them in our colony during the winter months. So we always seem to have this little lag, and so we dug through some literature, and we did find that there was a study showing how when you're trying to rear them out, that there's enough light that gets through the skin of the apple that it will trigger the larvae that's in there.
Wow, I was thinking of the adults. You're saying the larvae too, or photo?
The larvae as well. Yep.
Oh,
Because we changed our day length, so we increased the day length, and we're now pushing out more maggots into pupae.
So if they get a short day length, what do the larvae do? They just shut down and hang out, or what?
I think they just stop developing.
Huh.
So it's like, for that adult female, ecologically or biologically, it would be a dead end. It's a waste of an egg.
Right.
Right.
I got a question from your old buddy Garth.
Yep.
Any success with GF 120?
GF 120. So this would be work that Julia Ricci did. She spent quite a bit of time looking at that product, and she was showing that it would have some benefit. The issue with GF 120, I was working with that product in a vegetable crop, and the issue with it is trying to get the droplet size, and it's sticky. And as soon as it rains, you've got to go back out there and reapply it. And as soon as you get more than, say, 3 applications, unless you've got a really high value crop, you've now exceeded the cost benefit of the product.
Right, and it's a whole other application, the whole different technology. It's not what you're normally doing. So you got to spray for other insects anyway. So you're kind of catching other things up with your maggot spray, whereas GF 120 is a separate thing just for maggot. It's not going to affect anything else.
Oh, I wouldn't say that, because it does pull, it is attractive to other critters. So there is the potential that you're going to get non-targets showing up to those droplets, being attracted to it, because it's like molasses.
Well, is it going to do anything for leaf rollers? That's my main concern late summer.
Ooh. I don't know.
Well, I don't want to hog all the questions. I got some more chat room things to read here. In my experience, maggot really loves Sansa, Honeycrisp, Ginger Gold, Jana Gold, and Pristine.
Mm-hmm.
Any comments on that?
Some of those varieties I've not dealt with, but I know that we see Ginger Gold, Honeycrisp. Those are definite ones that they do prefer. The big one, the other one that they will that they go to even more so than Honeycrisp that we find is Ambrosia. So we use Ambrosia when in our rearing colony because they just go mad to lay eggs in that.
What about using trap trees of varieties that are more attractive to apple maggot to reduce orchard population?
That sounds like a Garth question.
That is.
That is, again, it's another interesting idea. In Nova Scotia and or New Brunswick, PEI, where we've got smaller blocks of land, smaller orchard plots, that might be a possibility. You could, either plant a trap crop, or you could, basically put use a bin and put your trap crop in the bin, and then you can move your bins around to where you might want them. I don't know how you would apply that in a huge acreage without sacrificing a row or two or four or more.
Yeah, seems like an expensive control. I think Tracy Lesky at the ARS here, she does all this work with trap trees and Jaime does too, Jaime Pinheiro, about, for plum cuculio, and you can also do that with apple maggot. So that might be a more promising way to get at that same idea, pull them all into a few trees and
then just treat those trees. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just how much space you have and the value of the space and other options that you have for control.
Here's a question: organic controls, visual trap options.
Such as the red sphere?
Well, I'm just reading the question. I had my own question about the red spheres versus the yellow cards. So just so folks know, and you might have noticed in one of Suzanne's photos, they use the yellow cards, and those cards, they are laced with ammonium acetate, I believe.
No.
They're not, they're just yellow cards then.
They're just yellow stickies.
And they don't use the red balls that we use here. You wanted to say anything about all that? Why you guys use yellow and why we use red balls?
I honestly do not know the history of why yellow sticky cards came into being. I know that it's always, my entire life, even when I was a kid and there was talk about apple maggot, it's always been the yellow sticky card. And maybe that was because of availability, cost, ease, because they are disposable. Yeah, you don't have to deal with stick them. You don't have to deal with cleaning them off.
Yeah, my understanding is based from the work that Harvey Reisig and Prokopi and others did developing the red ball traps, was that the yellow card was good at attracting the females and the males too, I guess, when they came out and emerged, because it mimicked the food source. It looks like where they want to land and lap up some, sugary exudates from leaf surfaces, which is what they do. Whereas the red ball is more attractive to the apple maggot fly females when they're looking for a place to lay eggs. So I think that's why Reisig and Ron Prokopi went for the red balls. And
wasn't Prokopi was also trying to use them as a mass trapping. Like he had there was that one study he did where he had, mass those spheres, and he had them sort of around the entire perimeter. And in doing that on a small acreage, was able to control apple maggot that way.
Yeah, and that's still in effect. There are people that have actually done that in commercial orchards. The one orchard that I know that was doing that was down in Connecticut, and I think he gave up after a few years just because of the labor. He just got tired of dealing with all the traps. But it can work. We recommend that for homeowners to put, one trap for each bushel of apples in the trees. Not that you're going to get perfect control, but you can knock them way back. And, spraying home trees is problematic. So that's one way of dealing with it. In terms of other organic controls, are there any, how about the organics formulation of spinosad, the Entrust? What do you think about that for apple maggot?
That one seems to have suppression more so than actual control. The other one that's our growers that I know some growers have dabbled with is the surround. So we coat the kaolin, the clay, and so you coat the apples, and
Right.
and I mean, as much as it does, I mean, the issue with that one is trying to get the coverage so that there's no spots on the apple that are free, because if they are free, then apple maggot does tend to find it. And they will just lay their egg in amongst. But then it's also getting that product off of the apple when you take it to market.
Right, and especially late season applications, you get in the calyx and it's really hard to get it out.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just noticing someone said they used surround for plum curculio with no effect on apple maggot. Yeah.
So you're seeing the chat too then.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot from the chat.
Well, I'm going to go to one of my questions while I'm scanning the chat here. So you replace the yellow traps every other week or so, or how often you said you replace them?
Yeah, we did it as needed. So, I mean, we were out in the orchard, multiple times in the run of a week. So it would be, if it gets clogged up, I mean, sometimes they'll blow down. We had a hurricane blow through, which took a lot of them for a little bit of a trip. And so everything had to be replaced. We've had occasions where there'll be like a flush of like bot flies, and they pollute it, and so they clog it up, and so we've had to take it down from that. We've had a dust storm blow through and put dust all over them, and so then they are no longer sticky. So yeah, I can't say that it's been every week. It would be as needed.
So there's a question about how much neem did you use in your combination sprays there?
We went with the label rate. So we were just following what was recommended from the site. I mean, that's a couple of years ago now. So the exact rate would have been just from the label. We didn't try to get fancy or cute and over or go under. We were just going with what's on that label.
And again, I'm doing too many things at once here, but what was your conclusion about the neem? Did it help much, or was it?
It showed some promise, but it was just very difficult to use because if you were, you would have had to have been applying it in the, during the warm part of the day, which is not always possible. So we just felt that it had a very narrow window of utility in terms of the practicality.
But it did give you some control.
It did. When paired with the Exarel, it did show some boost.
How about by itself? Exarel wouldn't be available to an organic grower, but what if they just sprayed with neem by itself? Do you think they get good control?
I don't know. We didn't use it. We didn't test it on its own.
And can you say more about GWN? Is that the neem? I missed that part.
No. Gwyn is a product that's from Gowan. So it was we called it the salad dressing. So it had the canola oil in it, and what else was in it? Capsicum extract. So pepper.
Oh, okay. I've heard about that. Okay. And
Yeah.
that's the product name is GWN?
Nope, that's the code name that we were asked to use.
Okay. And they don't have a product name yet.
Not for in Canada.
Okay. I don't think we have it either. Okay. I'm just reading some chat things here. And trust costs more than labor and perimeter for sticky balls. What would you use as a trap crop, and could you use a tote? I'm not sure what they mean there.
And could you use a what?
A tote.
That's referring to, remember you had said something to the effect of putting your trap apples into a bin and kind of toting those around?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, okay. So this is a conversation that Garth and I've had a couple times with respect to how to, how would you use trap trees, and what's the best way to use them if you didn't want to sacrifice trees within either a row or space, alternate planting in your within the row for these trees that you would then have to get into and kind of spray. And so we just kind of checked around the idea that if you with one of the dwarfing rootstocks, that you could probably put them in just a regular apple bin And then you could, with a forklift, you could move them to the end of the row, middle of the row, wherever you wanted to put them in that given year, depending on, you know, what you might be seeing on your traps, as a way to pull them into certain areas. And then you could either carry them out and destroy them, or you could carry them out of the orchard and treat them just on the side. Just as a way to, you know, it would minimize the amount of tractoring.
Yeah, getting back to the yellow traps, back in the day, one of the chats refers to this. We had these yellow traps with a red ball in the middle.
Yeah.
You got the best of both worlds. It was called the lad trap. We played around with them, and then we ended up just going to the red sticky balls. But the lad trap, I believe, also had the ammonium acetate in the yellow part of the trap. And this was before we had the odor bait lures that you can use with the red ball traps. But anyway, yeah, the lad trap worked, but it was kind of expensive, and I don't know if there ever was a threshold developed specifically for that. I got more messages here. Hold on. Can you address apple maggot mortality versus? Oh yeah, this is important.
Yeah, and
this whole thing about a sale pushes them off, but it doesn't kill them, so they just come back later.
Interesting, because we're actually getting reasonable results with a sale, like versus Calypso. But in terms of you know, like monitoring and figuring out what's happening with the products, no, I'm not able to comment on that one.
Harvey Reisig and David, I forget David's name, Michael wouldn't remember his name, the Hudson and Peter Yench, they've done some work on lack of mortality from our sale compared with the sale compared to Immodan. In other words, Immodan, they land on the, you know, the treated apple and head, whereas a sale they can land and leave, and then presumably come back later. But you already talked about this, but this is my big question. So if you're catching apple maggot, and we talked about this, you and I, in our warm-up session there. So I'm out in the orchard. It's, you know, it's August 28th. The last apple maggot spray went on August 10th. So you figure it's pretty much gone or entirely gone, especially if there's any rain on top of it. And yet you're getting threshold trap captures in late August. I brought this question to Harvey every year, and every year he would say, well, do you have a problem with damage? And I would say, well, not really that I'm aware of, but he said, well, then don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But what do you think about these late season captures? Are these, he would say, well, maybe the eggs aren't viable. Maybe she doesn't have any eggs left. They're just hanging around. Maybe it's males that are just left over. What's your, if you're in the orchard on August 28th and you catch apple maggot on a trap and the spray coverage is essentially gone, what do you tell the grower?
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, that's exactly why we're looking at these biopesticide options. To see if we can offer something that they can go in during that harvest window. But backing up, we really don't know whether those late season maggots, we don't know whether they are old guys that have been hanging around that just decided all of a sudden that they're going to actually become active. We don't know if they are active, do they have enough time, or do they have enough of the sex ratio there that they can go and mate and then get ready and actually lay an egg. For us, I mean, even a sting is something we can't tolerate. So then we do need to suss out whether or not we're seeing late season stings. And I know there's some rumblings in the industry that is what they are seeing. But if it's turning into a maggot, it doesn't seem to be doing that.
So you are seeing some late season stings that are.
There's some rumblings about it, and I would argue that my technician who's out there collecting apples, that she would definitely say, yeah, there's new stings showing up in September.
Okay, in terms of folks that are a little less sensitive, one saving grace I would add, and you can comment about how long this works, is a sail on top of a sting will get into the apple and kill the egg or even the larva before it does anything.
Yes.
Correct? Is just the egg, or does it actually kill a hatched larva also?
I would presume that if it can kill the egg, it would take the larvae. The larvae is much more vulnerable.
And that kickback effect is what, like a few days, right? I mean,
I would think so.
to a week. Okay. Well, I think we got to move on here, but I really appreciate you giving the talk. I think we all learned a lot. I certainly did. And
Great.
we should have we have pretty good connections between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and New England, but we should keep that going because we got a lot to learn from each other. We're not that different, in terms of what the trees and the bugs are doing. So.
No, exactly.
So I will thank you.
Thank you for
You're
having
right.
me. This was a lot of fun.